From my earliest memories, our family exuded an air of perfection, a carefully crafted facade that I, as a child, never questioned. My father, Michael Reynolds, was the very definition of dedication. By day, he spent countless hours in his modest garage, meticulously restoring classic cars, with a passion that was both an art and a science. His hands, calloused yet gentle, were a testament to years of hard work and devotion to his craft. My mother, Susan Reynolds, managed our home with an elegance that belied the ceaseless bustle of our everyday life. She balanced our household like a seasoned conductor. Each chore, each smile, every meal prepared with a quiet precision that seemed to promise stability and happiness. Our mornings began with a shared ritual that felt almost sacred. Every dawn, Michael and I would lace up our sneakers and head to the neighborhood park. The crisp air and dew on the grass filled me with an invigorating sense of adventure. I remember the friendly race to an ancient oak tree at the park's edge, a symbol of timeless endurance. In those moments, my father's soft chuckle and his proud, encouraging nods taught me the value of perseverance, discipline, and above all, the importance of cherishing life's simple joys. Yet, even in those idyllic snapshots of childhood, subtle signs whispered of an underlying imperfection. There were instances, a fleeting shadow in my mother's eyes, a hesitation in my father's smile, that hinted at hidden truths. These small, almost imperceptible cracks in our picture-perfect life would later unravel into complexities far beyond what I could imagine. For now, though, as a young soul bathed in the warmth of familial love, I embraced every moment, blissfully unaware of the storm that lay ahead. As I grew older, the flawless picture of our family began to show subtle cracks. I started noticing little details that hinted something wasn't quite right. My mother, Susan Reynolds, once the embodiment of grace and calm, began to seem distant. While preparing dinner or sitting quietly in the living room, her eyes would occasionally wander, as if she were lost in thoughts she dared not share. One afternoon after school, I overheard her engaged in a hushed, tense phone conversation. The tone was laced with sorrow and a secret burden, a stark contrast to the warm, nurturing voice I'd always known. It felt as though the person on the other end of the line was privy to truths too painful to speak aloud. This moment sparked a slow but unmistakable change within me. The secure, happy routine I had always relied on started to crumble under the weight of whispered doubts and fleeting, unguarded expressions. Meanwhile, my father, Michael Reynolds, remained absorbed in his own world of work and vintage car restorations, seemingly oblivious to the growing distance and silent confessions that were shaping our home. In that quiet, unsettling period, I began to realize that the perfection of our family life was nothing more than an illusion, one that would soon shatter into pieces, revealing hidden betrayals and unforeseen consequences. In the days that followed the first unsettling signs, the serene tapestry of our family life began to reveal hidden threads of betrayal. It started with a seemingly ordinary afternoon when I caught my mother, Susan Reynolds, speaking in hushed tones on her phone. Her voice, usually calm and comforting, now carried an unfamiliar note of hesitation and sorrow. Instead of confronting her immediately, I found myself compelled to observe. Each gesture, every fleeting glance, slowly piecing together a puzzle I never wished to solve. I began to notice the subtle changes that most would overlook. The way her hand would tremble ever so slightly when reaching for her cell phone, the quick, almost guilty glances she cast toward the doorway, as if checking for an intruder, and the long pauses before answering calls that seemed to carry secrets. Every unaccounted pause in her routine became a whisper of deception. I started recording these moments in a small, worn journal, a silent confession of my growing suspicions. Each entry detailed the time, the context, and the sting of betrayal I felt deep within. This internal investigation transformed my once innocent world into a clandestine mission. I became an unwilling detective, scrutinizing every word and every nuance. The vibrant mornings spent jogging with my father, Michael Reynolds, began to cast long shadows against the harsh reality that was slowly emerging. The comfort of familiar routines was replaced by a tension that clung to the walls of our home like an unwelcome fog. In that quiet, painful period, I was forced to question the very foundation of trust that I had always believed was unbreakable. The intricate web of subtle clues, each a testament to a hidden life, began to unravel the perfect illusion I once knew. With every page I filled in my journal, the image of the loving, reliable family I cherished gave way to a more complicated, heart-wrenching truth. This realization marked the beginning of a journey that would forever change us, compelling me to balance my loyalty with the urgent need to confront the looming betrayal. The realization of what was at stake, the slow burn of betrayal lurking beneath the surface, everything led to this moment, the pivotal tipping point. It was the spring of my senior year, and I had just been elected as class president, feeling an overwhelming sense of achievement. The pride of this accomplishment was a brief escape from the heavy cloud hanging over my family. One afternoon I came home eager to share the news. But as soon as I walked inside, I saw my mother, Susan Reynolds, sitting on the couch, her face pale and unreadable as she clutched her phone. The moment I stepped into the room, I was struck by the look she gave me. Guilt, discomfort, and something darker hidden beneath the surface. My father, Michael Reynolds, on the other hand, was the picture of joy as he pulled me into his arms. He showered me with praise, his sincere smile matching the pride in his eyes. The contrast between the weary, almost ashamed mother and the cheerful, unaware father was too glaring to ignore. At that moment, something within me snapped, an undeniable recognition dawning that the balance had shifted irreparably. The foundation had cracked, and there was no turning back. The look on my mother's face, the awkwardness of the moment, followed by my father's beam and pride, it all spoke to the brewing storm that would soon expose the truth. Later that day, an accidental conversation in the quiet of my room confirmed my secret suspicions. My mother was no longer the confident figure who had raised me with love and devotion. She seemed a stranger, her secrets now entangled with guilt and shame. A phone call, quiet yet cutting, revealed her involvement with someone who was not my father, a betrayal that, until that moment, I had dreaded imagining. There was no longer a way to ignore it. It was the moment I realized that the life I had believed in was gone. Yet, despite the sting, a small part of me, one that couldn't quite let go of the fragments of family I had always known, still hoped for an explanation, for some sort of redemption. But it was clear. Nothing could repair the disharmony that had settled into our home. The truth was far more painful than I'd imagined, and it became a heavy burden I no longer wished to carry alone. I knew I would have to confront it. No longer could I lie to myself or anyone else about what was happening under our roof. Please review this new section and let me know if it aligns with your expectations before I continue to the next one. For 9 seconds, as the weight of secrecy grew too heavy to bear, I found myself at a crossroads where silence was no longer an option. Every hushed phone call, furtive glance, and momentary lapse in her composed demeanor had etched itself into my memory. Over weeks, I meticulously recorded each subtle hint. A half-whispered conversation in a dimly lit room, the trembling of Susan's hands as she reached for her phone late at night, and the inexplicable pauses in our once routine family dinners. The evidence of my mother's betrayal was mounting, each detail a stitch in the unraveling fabric of our family's carefully maintained illusion. That fateful evening, as dusk settled and the familiar hum of the house faded into a heavy silence, I sat alone in the living room, surrounded by the echoes of a happier past. The ticking clock on the wall seemed to mark not just the passage of time, but the final countdown to a confrontation I had long dreaded. My heart pounded with a storm of emotions: rage, sorrow, and an unyielding determination to unmask the truth. I reread the entries in my journal, each word a stark reminder of the betrayal that had seeped into every corner of our home. With the evidence undeniable and the trust shattered beyond repair, I knew I had to confront Susan. It wasn't an eruption of anger, as one might expect, but rather a quiet, heart-wrenching exchange marked by long, painful silences and trembling confessions. My voice, steadied by years of suppressed anguish, finally broke the silence. I laid bare every suspicion, every secret observation that had transformed my once safe haven into a landscape of betrayal. In her eyes, I saw the collapse of the facade she had so carefully constructed, a vulnerable glimmer of regret that confirmed the painful truth I had known all along. In the heavy silence following that painful confrontation, I found myself caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The echoes of my mother's trembling confession resonated through our once peaceful home, leaving me with an overwhelming sense of responsibility. I knew I had reached a crossroads. Either allow our fractured family to descend further into chaos, or seize the moment to reclaim what had been lost. The thought of my father, Michael Reynolds, whose unwavering kindness had always been our family's anchor, our suffering under the weight of betrayal was unbearable. For days, I pored over every detail recorded in my worn journal. The hesitant phone calls, furtive glances, and the unspoken secrets that had slowly unraveled our perfect facade. With each painful memory, I realized that silence was no longer an option. The burden of keeping these truths hidden was too heavy, and the only way forward was to act. This decision was not made lightly. The bonds of family, though marred by deceit, still held immense power. Yet I understood that the only path to healing was through courageous confrontation and decisive action. Determined to protect my father from further heartache, I resolved to rewrite the narrative of our lives. I set out to gather all the evidence and confront the tangled web of lies head-on. This wasn't merely about retribution. It was about reclaiming dignity, restoring trust, and ensuring that the betrayal would not define our future. With a heavy heart and a resolute spirit, I began to map out the steps that would soon reshape our family's destiny, prepared to face the challenges ahead, no matter how daunting. In the wake of that painful confrontation, every lingering doubt and every secret note from my journal coalesced into one resolute decision. It was time to dismantle the web of betrayal that had held our family captive. The calm facade that had once defined our home was irrevocably shattered, and I could no longer stand by while my father, Michael Reynolds, a man of unwavering kindness and steadfast integrity, continued to shoulder the burden of my mother Susan's deception. The plan I had long nurtured slowly transformed into a series of decisive actions. First, I scrutinized every financial detail that intertwined our lives. What had once been a symbol of our shared future, a joint bank account, had become a tool of manipulation. With meticulous care, I canceled the tuition payments earmarked for my own education, redirecting those funds to secure legal counsel for my father. Every dollar I reclaimed was a small step toward reclaiming our dignity. Next came the most gut-wrenching move, draining the joint accounts to ensure that Susan could no longer leverage our finances against the man she once vowed to honor. It wasn't a decision born of malice, but of necessity, a final blow to the financial control that had, for so long, enabled her reckless betrayals. In that moment, I felt both the weight of loss and the stirrings of liberation. The act itself was as much a symbolic severance as it was a practical measure to safeguard our future. The final irreversible step was filing for divorce. I reached out to a trusted attorney, determined that our shattered marriage could no longer be mended by empty promises or whispered excuses. The legal documents were signed with a heavy heart, marking the end of an era defined by unfulfilled vows and hidden infidelities. My actions were not driven by revenge alone. They were a bid for justice, a necessary upheaval to clear the toxic remnants of deception, and to make way for a future built on honesty and respect. That day, as I submitted the divorce papers, I felt an overwhelming mix of sorrow and relief. I had severed the ties that bound us to a painful past, and though the consequences of these choices were yet to unfold, I knew that safeguard Fa's well-being, and reclaiming our shared future was worth every sacrifice. It was the beginning of a long, uncertain journey toward healing, a journey where trust would need to be rebuilt from the ruins of betrayal, and where every step forward carried the promise of a new dawn. In the wake of filing for divorce, the echoes of our broken family resonated in every corner of what once was a sanctuary. The decision to drain our joint accounts and sever the financial ties that had long masked the underlying deceit was more than a legal maneuver. It was a definitive act of reclaiming our dignity. My father, Michael Reynolds, now stood at the crossroads of sorrow and liberation. Freed from the constraints of a life marred by betrayal, he was forced to confront the duality of grief for a lost love and the hope for rebuilding anew. The legal proceedings that followed were as cold and unyielding as they were necessary. In sterile courtrooms, every document signed and every accusation hurled laid bare the consequences of my mother Susan Reynolds' choices. The bitter debates and relentless cross-examinations revealed a truth that could no longer be hidden. For my mother, the legal battles were a harsh reckoning, a stage where her actions were scrutinized with no room for denial or distraction. As the dust of the courtroom drama settled, the emotional fallout permeated our home. What had once been a space filled with warmth and shared memories was now a landscape of raw emotion, every conversation tinged with both regret and a cautious resolve. My father, though battered by the shock of betrayal, began to embrace the possibility of a future unburdened by lies. His long walks and quiet moments of reflection slowly replaced the heavy silence that had once defined our days. I found myself stepping into an unexpected role, a guardian of my father's newfound hope, and a mediator amidst the lingering chaos. The process of healing was neither swift nor easy. Every day brought fresh reminders of the past, even as we strove to move forward. Yet, in the midst of this emotional tempest, a spark of resilience ignited. We began to rebuild our lives, brick by brick, guided by a resolve to reclaim what had been lost. Though the scars of betrayal would remain etched in our hearts for years to come, this painful chapter paved the way for a more authentic future. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and moments of vulnerability, but the promise of renewal, of genuine trust and mutual respect started to emerge on the horizon. In the quiet aftermath of the storm, when the echoes of shattered trust still reverberated through our once hallowed home, a new chapter began to take shape. The divorce was finalized, and with it came a painful yet necessary liberation. For my father, Michael Reynolds, and for me. The betrayal by Susan had left deep scars, memories etched in every crevice of our lives. But it also forced us to confront our vulnerabilities and rebuild from the ruins. As Michael slowly returned to the workshop, where his cherished Mustang awaited his skilled hands, I witnessed a transformation that went beyond the physical act of restoration. It was as if every measured turn of a wrench and every stroke of polish symbolized the mending of a broken spirit and the reclaiming of a once dimmed light. In the days that followed, life became a series of tentative steps toward healing. I found myself grappling with a mix of resentment and acceptance, understanding that forgiveness was not a gift for Susan, but a lifeline for us. The raw emotions of the past gradually gave way to cautious hope. Michael, with his resilient nature, began opening his heart to new possibilities. Quiet moments spent reflecting on old memories, yet also dreaming of a future unburdened by deceit. Though the pain of betrayal lingered, it was gradually overshadowed by the resolve to move forward, to forge relationships founded on truth and respect, rather than on the brittle remnants of broken promises. For me, the journey was no less transformative. The lessons learned in those turbulent years, the importance of honesty, the courage to confront painful truths, and the strength in carving out a better tomorrow, became the cornerstone of my own path toward adulthood. While the shadow of the past would always be a reminder of what once was, it also served as a beacon, guiding us toward a future where authenticity replaced pretense and where the scars of yesterday paved the way for the triumphs of tomorrow. In that new dawn, we both discovered that while betrayal may forever alter the contours of our lives, it need not define our future. The promise of renewal shone through, inviting us to rebuild our family on a foundation of resilience, compassion, and a renewed commitment to truth. Trust and honesty are the very foundations of any meaningful relationship. When betrayal disrupts that trust, it not only shatters the illusion of a perfect life, but also leaves deep scars that demand healing. The narrative reminds us that while the pain of betrayal is profound, confronting the truth is essential for reclaiming our dignity and shaping a future built on integrity. In the midst of chaos and heartache, taking decisive action, no matter how difficult, can pave the way to renewal, growth, and the eventual mending of broken bonds. Ultimately, the lesson is clear. Even in our darkest moments, the courage to face reality and the determination to rebuild can lead to a more authentic, resilient, and hopeful life.